Right, well, I make it 11:30, so I'm going to start. Right, my name's Andrew Lewis. As you can probably read from the slide, my session today is called Designing Evidence, which was sort of intended to be vaguely provocative because it suggests you're all making it all up as you go along, but I'm not sure anyone got the joke. But what we're really going to be looking at today is these four things, which is quite a lot to cover in one session, but I've tried to keep everything as big and as tweetable from a distance as I can, so there's lots of slogans and things in this one. So if you want to take lots of shots and share them on Twitter, that's fine by me. So we're going to be looking at event tracking in Google Analytics, some tag manager, which is how you remotely deploy event tracking, making report language readable, and planning data captures. And of course, before you start typing, session slides are here. So if you need the slides, they're already there. I'll leave that on there for a second. And shameless plug for my own Twitter thing. If you want to follow that, the data that we will be extracting from this session later will be tweeted at some point. So we're going to be looking at interface use in its broadest sense, or interface use as it's clipped here for some reason, and how to turn that into evidence as opposed to just data. And there will be audience participation, so I hope you're all up and lively and not too many of you went to karaoke last night. And we will be getting your data in real time. So I need you to go to this URL right now, which looks a bit like this. Hang on. Oh, yeah. This is where I'm hoping the conference Wi-Fi will be our friend. But basically, if you can all just do this form, this will buy me some time, but it will also give us some real data to be actually playing with. Sorry, yeah, good point. Yeah, very good point. Okay. Hang on. The quick one is bit.ly.mcn data, all caps. Well, the MCN data bit is. Is that coming up for everybody?
Having Wi-Fi trouble in this room.
Oh, okay, right, okay. Well, do what you can, but if we can get any data, it would be good. So I'm going to harvest your data and play it back to you in a minute, so if it all goes according to plan. So this is a risky strategy, using anything that is live, but here we go. Right, has anyone managed to get it up at all? Okay, cool, well that's some. So, okay, has everyone got the URL down anyway? Everyone got the URL? Okay, I will move on. So what we're basically trying to do today is avoid data sad face, because nobody wants to look like this poor guy here. And fret not, I'll just show you why we're bothering to do any of the things that I'm teaching you today. So the sorts of things we're looking at, actually it's a bit dark, but the sort of things we're looking at are things we've been playing with in the last year since we started using Tag Manager. We've been using event tracking for quite a long time, and this is some extensions on what you can do with it and where we've used it to change services rather than just play around and dump loads of data into Google Analytics that we don't use. So with these techniques, you can do things like you can see what works on your navigation. So here is an older version of the VNA's website where you can do quite simple things where you just look at what works in order of the clicks on all your header and footer navigations. And so we discovered back in some time ago that I can't remember, that if you looked at all the header and footer navigations in order, then the third most popular link on the general navigation was in the footer, which seemed a bit unusual because you would hope that your header links are the ones that everyone uses because that's why you put them in the header. So we had to rearrange the way we promoted current exhibitions, which is actually on reflection, people come to your museum to look at your exhibition. So we have changed it actually so they're more image-led and rather than link-led. So, but that's the sort of thing you can do, and it's quite easy to spot these things if you've got enough data for it. And similarly, on the mobile, if you track the navigation on the mobile, you can say, right, here's our fabulous drop-down menu that everyone loves, don't they? Well, you can just measure it. How many people actually use it? You'd expect this normally to be roughly in a straight line because you put the most, you broadcast your your sense of importance of these links in the order of the menu, and you hope that they're used in the same way, but they're not, which allowed us to change the menus on the mobile version. So, so pretty simple stuff, but quite useful. So you can also do much more interesting things, like you can see how people are really using your services. So on here, how much do people actually pinch to zoom, which is something you don't normally get out of analytics beyond page views and things, or how much are they actually scrolling on this particular part of your tablet app, for example. And so when we were designing our digital map, we were able to do this and look at all the different places on the map where people used it and say, actually, do you know what? You keep going on and on and on about search, but only 1% of all your users are using search because we designed this to be a browsable, lovely interface. And hey, look, people are browsing it. So you can also say that only 1% actually looked at the more details of the objects over here. But what we hoped to do with this, and what this data supports, if not proves, is that the areas that are intended to be swished with your fingers are used quite a lot, which is good. And you can also do the same thing on the mobile version, and when you look at the mobile version, you'll find that they're similar, but they're not the same. So not that surprisingly, the big mappy area is used a lot more, and people pinch and zoom on that, but that's because on the portrait view, which is what everyone uses, you don't get the menu, so of course people use that much less. But, so you can compare orientation and all sorts of things like that. You can also measure how the game results. So the results of games affect the impact of your calls to action. So here is a game we had called the Definery, where you upload an object you own, and it asks you a series of questions, and then it makes a judgment, and it deigns your property to either be luxury or vulgar, basically. So it's a sort of provocative thing aimed at getting people slightly irritated or pleased so that they will think about the meaning of the term luxury to do with an exhibition about luxury. But when you do that and you look at the results, you find that the people that share it, it's almost twice as many people share it when they get a positive result as when they get a negative result. Now, you might imagine that to be the case or prove it, or predict it, but this is actually the data. This is every single user. When combined, that's the results. And similarly with the what is luxury finding out about the exhibition, 20% compared to 10%. So these sorts of things then help you think, actually, next time I do a game, I might annoy people some of the time just to be doing, but when I want them to do something or specific things, I can make them happy. Or not, but you can do little things like this. You can see where visitors really go over Wi-Fi. So here is our desktop version of our Wi-Fi connection screen. And obviously, you can tell things like the click-through rates, where they're going. And more interestingly, because you're coupling it up to analytics data, you can use all the other metrics and dimensions that they have in analytics. So you can say, actually, what language pages are they landing on? And then you can start to get clues about the types of people who are using your Wi-Fi. So lots of Germans, lots of Italians, lots of French, Japanese, and things like that. So if you're going to target language things for your Wi-Fi users, you can target on the ones that are using it the most. And then you can also understand more things about your own collections. So here is a beautiful NetSki thing. Does anyone know what NetSki is? Yay. Okay, good. Well, basically, it's a little buckle thing that goes on an external pocket, like a duffel bag, toggle, basically, but much, much more beautiful. We've got lots of these. I'm sure quite a lot of other of you have as well. And obviously, this picture doesn't really do it justice. It really doesn't do it justice when it's dark like that. But this is what it looks like when you download the large image, which we kindly make available for free at sort of A5 size. And here's the page, and this is how we do it. So we put up a form, and when we put up the form, we essentially do the you promise not to be naughty thing, where as long as you fill out this, you get the thing for free, saves any staff intervention, and so on and so forth. But because we do that, we can hook up on all the things that they're sending us, the feedback they're giving us effectively. These bits over here. See, shadow puppets too, you get everything in this session. And then you can see this sort of stuff. So something like 0.5% said private research, almost half said personal use, and pretty much both of those are saying, we're not going to tell you what we're doing, we just want to get the stuff. That's what they're really saying. But where this arrow over here is, that's basically where the interesting things is. Those are the people who have actually been honest about the fact that they're going to use it for a book or they're going to use it for a journal. Again, because it's analytics and it's linking it to the session, then you can go away and see all the other things they did in their session, like where they visit, do they look at collections. When we haven't yet got CRM data yet, but once that starts kicking in, we can start to think, actually, these people we know are killer users. And so flog them stuff or whatever it is that you want to do, something, or give them freebies or whatever. You can also do things like this. So on the left, this is how many people are generally browsing object pages on the collection site. Most from the United Kingdom. This is actually the top 10 pages where they're all from one country. So it's a bit hard to describe that. But on the general, just looking at stuff, it's all UK. On things where people are engaged enough to actually download a large image, none of them are UK. So you can get a sense of your international reach for what you would class as an engaged user, but somebody goes as far as actually getting a large image of. So, and then finally, this is a really good one. I like this one. So this is an audio guide that we're about to launch for galleries in December, which is essentially bring your own device type thing that helps you have audio as well as just look at the gallery. So it's a curator in your pocket. And this is typical behavior on a thing. So tappity tap 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 tap. Everyone does that. But you can then basically click and say, actually, do you know what? We know for every single session of every single individual user, every single interaction they did. So they paused an audio, they started an audio, how long it was before they started it. And all that stuff is all possible using techniques that I will extrapolate in a moment. So how do we do this? Let's start with the 4 things I promised I'd say. So event tracking in Google Analytics. How many people have actually done event tracking? Okay, a little bit. I'll know this from the data in a minute, of course, won't we? Actually, out of interest, how many people have used Tag Manager? Oh, okay, right, good. So, okay, hopefully this will enlighten you in some ways then. So I thought it's best to just define it for those who've got it and those who don't, but this is more or less what event tracking does. Big, slogan-y, so, tweetable. But essentially, if you do anything like click a button, what event tracking does is it turns it into a packet of data that is sent to Google Analytics. So emphasis on the word data, because what it's not doing is giving you evidence or information. It's just data, unless you do something with that to design that data into something useful. So for example, I want to know how effective the promotional call to action pages on my homepage, how effective are each of these images and all their accompanying text. And you can get things out like this. I don't know. Actually, you might be able to read it. So you can work out that, for example, the main banner image, which is beautiful fabric of India up there, is actually slightly less effective than the row 1 box over here, which seems strange, but maybe shoes are just more popular. You've got to be a little bit careful with this, because obviously if you change the timing of those boxes going on the site, you need to know that. Otherwise you can make a few false implications. So broadly speaking, without going into any real technical thing, in information terms, this is what a packet of data or packets of data in event tracking look like. And that isn't evidence at all. That's just essentially the data structure that comes out in. So you have 3 levels of hierarchy. You have categories, which could be things like navigation or Wi-Fi or email sign-up. Within those, you can have actions. So within navigation, you have header or footer. And then labels. And labels typically tend to be variables, like if you clicked on a navigation, which page did you go to, the URL, that sort of thing. Don't worry too much about this. This is a large thing through a lot of subjects, and so that's why it's all in the slides. So let's go back to your form. In terms of your form, this is the form you did. Now, if I can get the Wi-Fi to go, I should be able to go and see how you've been categorized. So here we are. This is the category of MCN 2015 Designing Evidence Demonstration. So it looks like we've had, let me just check my date on there. Yeah, that's today. So it looks like we've had 226 events in this room, which is very exciting. And this is what they look like. So I can see that there were 143 interactions where somebody pressed a button. There was 45 clicks on slider, 20 clicks specifically on the prior experience slider, and these responses. So if we go into these responses, you can see, ooh, look at this. So, and this over here is the submissions we've got. So quite a lot of noughts and things, which is good, because hopefully you'll come away with higher ones at the end. And that's all good, but I can also do things like this. If I add a secondary dimension of session ID, essentially that actually is now linking, anonymized, but it's linking that data to a specific individual, which will make sense later on. That's right, there is another survey. So just to show you that we're already capturing your data, this is the one I prepared earlier, as I say. So how am I doing this? So this is done using remote control via Google Tag Manager, which is a new, newish. I think it came out about this time last year, and then just when you got used to it, they changed it all, and it's typical Google thing. They changed the interface, they changed the whole terminology, within it. Luckily, we hadn't invested too much time in it by that point, but nonetheless, what it essentially does is this. So with Tag Manager, you configure your data capture through a web interface. So instead of putting lots of code in the page, you do it in an interface. So I want to know how effective each promotional call to action is on my home page, if you remember from our previous example. And this is what it looked like with a traditional event tracking, which is essentially lots and lots of code in the page on your actual page. Now, I don't know how many of you are able to get to the source code of your homepage, for example, and put code in, or even know how to. Is anyone not able to edit the code on their homepage? I can't believe only one person is not able to. There must be more. So everyone else can edit it directly, correct? Or am I asking you double negatives and confusing you all? Yeah, okay. Trick question there. Honest. Okay, so generally speaking, it's quite difficult to make changes to the code, especially if you've got like code deployment, things like that, which are all good things. Generally, you don't want to make lots of changes to the code in the live page because you run the risk of all those navigations just suddenly disappearing or appearing wonky and things disappearing. So not only that, but it's usually very expensive in terms of, or expensive and restricted in terms of who can do it. So there's usually a few technical people who are able to do it. You go through them and they're obviously a bottleneck for a good reason, but nonetheless, that's a difficult one. So with Tag Manager, using this rather crude metaphor of a time and space portal, which actually is really a badly photoshopped sinkhole of Google Images. So essentially, all you do is you just put this blob of code in there, and that does act as a hole into your page. And then all the tags and things are not put in the page. They're all administered by a sort of grand, evil master plan interface somewhere else. We also actually do two holes in the page, in fact. So we have two sets of tags. Now, the main reason Google wanted to do this is to get round the fact that technical staff don't like people messing with their code for good reason. So in order to get around that and speed things up and generally not ask and do all sorts of evil things like deposit tracking code all over your site, then Google introduced this system. That's their main reason for doing it. But it does allow you to deploy Google things, but you can also apply JavaScript into the page. You can apply lots of things, but you are essentially just dropping packets of code into the page. And in return, it's serving you back things via a data layer. Now, I'm not going to get into the technical side of this because this is really an overview just to see whether there is anything useful in it for you. But so we have two tag holes, if you like. So this tag container over here is our code, and this one over here is our marketing agency code. And so we separate these two things. It is worth noting that Google don't recommend you use two containers on one page, but we haven't actually had any trouble with that. Effectively, what they're trying to do is avoid code clashes. So if you've got code in one and code in the other, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. But as long as you're in control more or less of both codes, then that's fine. But what it does mean is we can turn off all the marketing agencies' code if they suddenly release something that we don't like, basically. In fact, they can't release it without us asking, but more on that in a bit. So here are the basic Tag Manager concepts for beginners. As it sounds like you're mostly beginners on Tag Manager, that's good. I have pitched this right. So there are sort of four big things that are worth knowing about. There's a tag container, which I've already, sorry. Can you actually see that? It looks like a blob to me. Is it just a blob to you? Yeah, okay, fine. Just okay. So a tag container is the hole in the page that the code gets in, how you drop the code in the page remotely, but also how you get data out. Then you have the tags themselves, and what they basically do is they define those layers of those little packets that I was talking about earlier in hierarchical definitions. That's where you define it in the tag. And then that tells you what it is you're going to get in analytics when you do it. And the trigger is essentially a set of rules that says only fire this when a certain thing is true. So it's the thing that allows it to fire in the first place. And then the variable is the thing that populates values into it. So in the navigational example, the URL variable would just be whatever that link's pointing at, so fairly straightforward. Here's some dull-looking code that doesn't mean anything, but this is what the interface looks like. And this is a tag, which is far too dull. So this is another risky moment here where I'm going to try and edit the live tags that captured your data a minute ago. So you will actually see this in real time, and we will make changes. In fact, this is audience participation point because I'm going to try and get you to ask me to change something and capture something new and see if we can actually do it. So you'll notice I've got a test container. This is to make sure that my crude tinkering for this demonstration doesn't break the main website. Especially as I'm not actually in the country and all that sort of stuff, I could get into a lot of trouble. But broadly, with containers, you can put containers on any page. So if this container is only on these 2 test pages and not anything else. But you'll see the marketing one there. There's a whole lot of other ones you can't see here. But I've also got a test analytics property as well. So the thing it's firing into is not our real property, so I'm not getting all the spurious data going into the main analytics, basically. So this is Tag Manager. This is what it looks like. It's start, and you can't really see on the left. Let me just see if I can. Oops, I enable. Right. Yeah, I'll do that. Otherwise, you're going to get clipped. So it has tags, triggers, variables, and folders, and these are the tags that were counting your stuff. So, for example, in here, this is a basic tag. And so when you have a tag, you can set it what you want to count it into. I'm using analytics because that's what we want to do. But you can actually put all sorts of things into these tags. So what this tag is going to do is going to get fired through that container onto your page using this publish button up here. But you can do all sorts of tracking code. You can create custom HTML, so you can put your own JavaScript in. You can do lots of things like that. Then within the tag, this is where the magic happens. This is the tag itself. So where you saw category designing evidence, that is basically where you put it. And then the actions are here. And then clicked on the button is there. And this is the trigger. Oops. And this trigger is a really basic trigger that says if any clicks happen, just count them. Now, this is a really dangerous trigger, actually. You'd never use this on a live site. Because if you if you fired a tag that says every single click on your website, count it on your main site, on all your pages, you would end up vast amounts of buzz going around for no real information. So although it works here, it's a really bad way to do it, but just so you get the sense. So I mentioned variables. The variables in analytics, the good thing about this is instead of having to know what all that code is, I don't know if I can, I won't try and get back to the code page, but the page where you have to edit everything in the page, in sort of HTML and all that sort of really tricky JavaScript stuff, is all done in this form. Oops, sorry. Where we got to? Sorry. It's all done in here. And these are built-in variables. So the most useful things are things like click element, click classes, and that basically there's a data layer in analytics, in Tag Manager rather. So if you click on anything, it'll tell you the thing that was clicked, or the class that was clicked, or the ID that was clicked, and that's quite a powerful set of hooks that you can pull all these tags onto. So more on that in a minute. Right, so moving on. Those things that are using the data layer essentially do need your code to be in a structured way. So it's not like you can get away with not knowing how your page is structured. So you do need your developers to understand what's going on here as well. But broadly speaking, most developers like having structured things. That's how they can cope with the world. So that sounds a bit derogatory, but they are very good at that sort of thing. But essentially, if all your links of a certain type have the same class, which they normally would, because that's just best practice in coding, then you can say for all the things that are of class widther, then if anyone clicks on anyone with that class, tell me what the ID is, and that sort of thing. And then as long as you've got meaningful IDs on your pages, you can say, somebody used the slider, I know what slider it is, therefore do this and send this data. Again, you can't really expect to pick all that up in a session like this. Oops, sorry. But, so, that's roughly how it all works. But in terms of that, that's just really talking about catching data and firing it into analytics. None of that is really any use unless this is true. So if your reports don't make any sense, they won't basically have any impact. But it sounds obvious, but I've seen many reports that are not great. So here's a quick audience participation. Can anybody tell me what they think line 2 might be about? So this is a report from our analytics system. So what do you think we're counting in line 2?
Lives.
Sorry?
Lives.
Maybe. This one? Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Content.
Ooh.
Static.
Ooh, yeah. How about that one?
User interface.
Ah, right. Okay, yeah. So basically, if you were trying to present this, to your funders, for example, they might sort of be glazing over a bit, which I'm hoping you lot are not. But by the magic of reveal, so here's what they really say, and actually pretty good. Links, navigation, content. So if I had suites, I'd be throwing them out. But none of those crude tricks around here. But so basically, it's a pretty basic example, but it is just one of the points I'm trying to make. So you can take that a step further. Because you only have these 3 layers of hierarchy, which are category, action, and label, you can do things like you can effectively create your own sub-hierarchical levels. So if you have an action, instead of just calling it category navigation, then open menu, then something, then you run out of room, basically. So in this case, you can have subdivisions using a dash to space them up. Now, the advantage of that is if you start all your things in structured naming, saying audio controls did something, did that, and then so in this case, audio controls use location finder, switch the gallery location image. You could then use the label to say which image. Whereas if you'd used just audio controls as your action, you'd be screwed, basically. So so you can end up adding lots of layers of hierarchy to your data. I mean, you need to be careful that you don't overdo it. But the other advantage of that is because if you use the basic search, simple search in your reports in analytics, it will just pull out all the audio controls, so you can see them at a point, you can export it, you can make a nice pie chart out of it, and you can say this is how often people use all the audio controls as opposed to the navigation, as opposed to the search. So how do you get that? So how do you plan a data capture to get that language portable? So again, it didn't get clipped, that's good. So planning your data structure is basically how you get your clear reporting to work. So you have to sort of think about it. And here we are back with our categories, actions, and labels. And here we are with some actual things. So this on here is, you can't see it, but it's audio guides, dash Europe 1600. And again, if I just put that as audio guides and then this is Europe, then I'd run out of room to do anything useful with it. So you've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers in a 3 hierarchy system, which is cheating, basically, but it's cheating in a good way. Categories do need to be really top level because they're the sort of first things you see. So of all the events you've got, this is just about the audio guide, or this is just about the Wi-Fi, or this is just about the navigation. Otherwise, you end up with hundreds of categories and it all gets very tedious. And this is another pretty fundamental but not always obvious thing, is essentially start by imagining what your report is. In fact, don't start by imagining it. Go and speak to staff who are actually going to do anything with it and say, if you had a report that you wanted, what would be in it? Once you know roughly what they want it to say, then you can start thinking how you can design a data structure to capture that. But design prototypes can be rough and ready. So let me show you some real ones, just so it's not all abstracted. So here we are, the audio guide, tappity-tap, blah, blah, blah. And this was one of the, this is a real set of requirements somebody handed me one day on the desk, saying this is what we need from the stats. Obviously, you can't read any of it. I don't think I've got a bigger version. So essentially, after I digested what that was, in fact, after I managed to work out what the handwriting was, I then went to the audio guide as it was at the time. And I just essentially went around I printed them all off on a piece of paper, and then I just went around and said, actually, there are 14, I think, different things going on here on these things. And then you start to classify them. So these things, you can't really see it, these things here are navigational things. So let's see if there's a category in navigation. These, is that an audio one? Can't really see it, but there's an audio player in this. It's an audio guide. So you have things like pause, play a transcript, play again, replay, that sort of thing. And those are all audio controls. So those are things that are interesting to know about without knowing about the navigation. So that's another category. And then you've got a search box on it, which I don't think you can easily see on there either. And search is another, whoever's recording this, I must not stray from the microphone. And search is another category. So this is probably the easiest way to do it. You can plan all these things on a computer, but sometimes it's just easier with a pen. And then you can work out, as you go through, the little orange marks are where I've done something about it and I've created a category. So this is roughly halfway through the process. And there's another one, I think, further on that's got green ones on where I've done the next category. So this is the other example of the map. Here's the sort of big areas and what they do, and this is how that started off. So we essentially got the whiteboard out and the whiteboard pens and drew the map and said, right, okay, how many categories are we going to get away with here? And we started off with these 3 areas, which is the map, touchy bit, the right-hand sidebar, and then the bottom object bit. And then that's where it all grew out from. Here's the game results one. This is the diagram where we were trying to work out the algorithm of how, when you ask a load of questions, so I've got a beanbag for the sake of argument, and you ask a question, say, how much is it worth? You say, if they answer this, they'll go down, but they could go up, and that's what these are. So the value of their score, if they're below this line, they're going to be vulgar. If they're above this line, they're going to be luxury. And this is the range, so we weight it by this much. If they do it that way, we're going to go up quite a lot, but if they only say this, we won't necessarily go down the same amount. And this is really just to hide the logic from the user, just so that they can't guess what the answers are. But in order to work out how to get the result to work, this was how we visualized it. And then we ended up with something like this, which is where it's actually a slightly different example, but some of the pickup is in the code. So in some cases, you go through a form, and the JavaScript in the form is adding all the values up and then storing it somewhere. And sometimes it's being done in Tag Manager. So you have to work out where the division is. So all the stuff I'm doing is down here, as indicated by this bad scrolling. And the stuff the developer's doing is up there. And it's actually not much up there, but you do need to be clear with your developers who does what, basically. Of course, once you've got all this data, you then need to extract it. So this is something we've played around with, which is not immediately obvious, but is quite useful, which is if you want to get a huge amount of data out, then you can't really do that in event tracking because there's just too many layers. You've created these hundreds of layers of hierarchy, but it is only used to coping with 3. So here is an example of some excessively long labels. So this is real data from a prototype. So essentially, if I can zoom it in a bit, it is all the different things they put in. There's a date stamp, there's an ID, this is the actual label here itself. But the reason it's done that way is because if you then export it, you can export it with Excel, that whole report. So far, so similar. This is a bad slide, I'm afraid, but essentially you just copy this whole column, paste it into a text document, and then save it as a CSV. And when you re-import that, all that data is now in columns. And so this is stuff for real number crunches. This is not the sort of thing you do for general reporting. But you can basically get vast amounts of data out in quite a neat way this way. And then what that gives you is this is the actual data itself. So this is some of the data in our test sessions. And the session IDs, where they're the same, that's the same person. In some cases, it's different IDs can be the same person if they're using different machines. But broadly speaking, it's the same user session. And these things over here are the time it took them to do anything. So some of these are not quite what you expect because they're in testing. But so that second blue one, they clicked on the tool loaded button within a second. Then they went to the main menu. And then 6 seconds, they did navigation, close the menu. Then at 75 seconds, quite a big gap, there's search, selected tool. Then they loaded the tool. And then they searched for this time and dex wax object. Then they loaded the tool that was in, and with all the timing. So essentially, you've got that level of data for every single transaction with the timings for that audio guide, which is, yeah. So this is where you say, when you go back to do the evaluation, which some poor bugger is going to have to actually do all this and get it out and read it and make sense of it, you can say, it's not just that on average, it's not just on average this is what happens. This is what happened in this session, this is what happened in this session, this is what happened in this session. And then you can start to see patterns emerging. So we're bracing ourselves for a lot of data, but with that data, you should then be able to make much more informed decisions about what's really working in the guide and not. So if nobody's ever clicking on things, you can tell. But if they're taking a very long time to click on those things, you can also tell. And that's something you can't just get easily from observing 10 people. You can get the really frustrating things, but you can see all sorts of stuff. So handy tips, we're almost done. We're on to the handy tips sections now. So there's a whole load at the end that I won't sort of go through in any detail because it's too much of a Saturday morning for that sort of thing. But the Google add-on for spreadsheets is really good. I don't know if you've noticed recently, but if you're trying to get reports out from analytics, they put a limit on how many rows you can get out. So if you try and show rows, you can't go above 5,000 anymore. So if you're extracting this sort of data at this level, then that's going to be a problem. So So what you can do is if you go into a normal Google spreadsheet like this, there is some, so there's an add-ons menu, and prior to this you would have used the get add-ons option. But once you've got this, there's a Google Analytics add-on. You just literally takes about 2 seconds to install it. Once you've got it, you can configure it using this wizard that says which property do you want. So you select the thing you're trying to file your data into and you choose it. You can add dimensions like event category in there. And then essentially, so here, this is getting about 10,000. It does it in rows of 10,000 at a time. I've started the second row on 995 because I want to see if I just want to check the end of one is the same as the beginning of the next to make sure it's right. Again, don't imagine you'll remember this, but it's all in the slide. But it is a really useful tool. But what this is basically doing is it creates a spreadsheet with a configuration file, which allows you to basically work out what you want to put in it. And then you can just copy these columns into the next one and then tweak them a bit. And it allows you to configure. And what it then does, when you press run report, it goes off to the API and it says, right, I don't know what this means, but just give me the data. And it populates it straight into the spreadsheet. So you just get it spewed straight into your spreadsheet for future consumption. So here's a checklist. I'll leave that up. This is pretty obvious in a sense, but I thought we've tried to sort of stick to this. So at the beginning, obviously the main thing to start with is what is it you're trying to record. So agree your objectives. And then obviously define success measures. A lot of this has come off in a lot of sessions, but it is quite important to start with that. So what is it you're trying to test, and then what data would allow you to test those aims? Then do you need to go bespoke? Because a lot of this stuff is already in analytics. There's no point in writing events there's no point in writing an event for a page view, because a page view is there, or even a session time. With the audio guys, we wanted to know action times, and that's different from session times. But if you just want the duration of the session, it's in there already. So don't waste your time creating it again. This is where it gets to the useful stuff. So consider ease reporting. So what will people actually use? So what can they understand? And then what data hierarchy will give you that? Then you have to apply that to the page code. So if your code doesn't have these structured hooks on, you're not going to be able to extract it easily. And that's why you need to have a reasonably good relationship with your developers. Generally, they'll be positive about this because it is sort of best practice stuff anyway. Then you have to configure Google Analytics. This is where you do all that stuff in Tag Manager and do all the tags, and that can take a while. That's why I've got test. So you put it in, and you test it, and then tweak it, basically. So it probably should be in some form of circular diagram, as is traditional at this point. But is everyone finished with that slide? Can I? Yeah. So let's go back and see what. There's a whole load of more tips that I won't go through in the end, but I'll just whiz through them. But before we do, if you can try and get to this page. Oh, wrong page. Sorry, to the right. That page. If you can try and get to that page, we'll see if we can capture any of the before and afters, because this is the post-session survey. So hopefully I'm expecting those numbers to go up a little bit, but you can at least put disparaging comments in the other box if not. So. And then hopefully we should be able to show you that we can see the before and after data for the individual person, which is always a bit risky with live testing. Are we able to see that? Okay. I shall give you a moment. Right. Are we all more or less on the page? Can I? So I'm going to go and have a look at the data here. So this is the data there. Let's have a look at that in real time. So in real time, it's looking like that. So this is you in real time, basically. So let's have a look at some of the posts. Yeah. So hey, look, slightly higher numbers. That's good. So what I'm gonna attempt to do is try and marry up the, not now obviously because this would be extremely tedious for you to watch, but I'm trying to marry up the two sessions before and after, and show that this is actual real data that we've collected in real time. So the other bit, if I go down to there, where's it gone? So here's the, sorry, are people familiar with the Google Analytics real-time thing? Do people, who's seen that before, real-time? Okay, and who hasn't? Okay, I'm not sure that was all of you put together, but anyway, but who doesn't know? But basically, it's a very good thing. It's good for this sort of thing if you're using a test property to fire it into, because you try and do that on the real one, you've got stuff firing in left, right, and center, and you can't find it out very easily. So I'm just trying to find all there. What have I got to? Sorry, I think I clicked on a label. Anyway, I won't bore you with that, but essentially, your data is now hopefully captured. So let's just quickly go back to there. I will whiz through these because these are now getting into bullet points, and that's far too tedious for a Saturday afternoon, in fact. But there are useful things about Tag Manager. So we've already said this. There are holes in the pages to which you can sneak stuff in. And you can do it retrospectively, as in you can have code that's already been published, and you can add tags to that code otherwise, as long as you know what it is. What it doesn't do retrospectively is count. You can't, if you change the naming of your structures, it doesn't apply them to the retrospective data, much the same as normal analytics. But the good thing about this, and one of the reasons they've done this way, is that if you have a cached page normally, you know that bit about just press F5, and everyone, you get people saying, oh, I've asked you to change this page, and then nothing's happened, and you have to sort of just tell them to refresh the page because of their local browser cache. This pretty much gets around that because it doesn't load the JavaScript when you load the page. What it does is it loads the whole, and then the whole goes away and sees what's most current. So it effectively cache busts the HTML, which is actually quite a big deal. So if you want to make changes to what you're catching, it pretty much is immediate across almost all of your users. Obviously, they may still have a page open that's got this code in. If they've got a page loaded in the browser, it won't do it. But if they refresh the page, it will recache it effectively, which is quite a powerful thing. What else we've got? We use twin containers. I told you that, but although it isn't officially recommended, it doesn't seem to be a problem. We're in about a year into it, but we're still learning. And test properly easier, that's fine. So I think I've said start with reports. Oh, yes, this is the naming your child test. This is the thing of how do you name your baby? And the way to sort of avoid future embarrassment is to imagine them 20 years on in a bar, just about to meet the person of their sexual preference, saying, hello, my name is... And if you get it right, then it's not too cringeworthy. Now, obviously, you can't tell what names will be like in the future, but you should sort of do that with your data, which is just when you present this stuff to somebody in your meeting, if you've called it something really stupid and they're like really serious, it ain't going to give you any impact. So it's worth applying that sort of test to mainly your naming conventions more than anything. This third one's a bit of a hard one to describe, but if you are creating values like navigational ones where the label is always the URL, then there are other categories and actions that might end up in a URL. So you need to sort of try and think about how can you cross-cut. So if you start with a URL, what's the category? And it's mainly about not putting what would be in the label field in one category and then putting it in the action field in another category. Because if you do that, then you're just going to get all confused about it. So it's keeping pure to your sort of data structures, basically. You can rename schemas, but if you do it, it won't apply them retrospectively. And you can, I didn't really go into it, but you can also group the event tracking using custom variables. So I doubt anyone has used custom variables in Google Analytics. Am I right in thinking that? Anyone used custom? Oh, got two, right, cool. So essentially, I've set one up here called session ID, and that basically is capturing that random number that the code fires. It's actually I think it's a 10-digit random number with the last 5 things of the timestamp or something, and that random number, if you use the timestamp, then all of you would have the same number, but if you put a random one on the end of it, that's what I'm using, and that's a session ID, but anyone because that's captured at the beginning of your session, that will allow me to identify the prior and the post surveys that are one person, basically. So, if none of that means anything, don't worry about it, it's not that big, it's a bit advanced. More advanced things, we do that using cookies, that bit about session ID, so it doesn't really work unless you'd actually set the cookie with that and then pick it up again. you can set the HTML elements to store data. Anyone know about data attributes in HTML? Does that mean anything? Yeah, so essentially, if you put where it's things like data ID equals Tom or something, if that's in one of your HTML tags, then Google can pick that up natively because it recognizes data attributes. So gobbledygook for most people, I suspect. And then you can date stamp, I've said that one, and then clever naming does it in 5 layers. So pretty much that's it. We've got some more posts on here. I shall leave. Oh, yeah, that's good. Look at those in the slides. And thank you very much. Any questions? Yes?
It's always a tricky one, but the amount of tags firing on
Mm-hmm. There is, this is something, yes, sorry, yeah. So the question was about whether the amount of tags firing on a page has an effect on performance, and yes, it will do. So this is one of the reasons that developers don't like you going around them, or technical staff, admin staff, whatever, whoever they are, is that if you have shitloads of things firing in your page, then potentially it's going to have performance issues, and actually just the code itself, because it is loading code into your page. If you look at the view source of your page and then the inspection of your page, you'll see it's different. So what is actually being sent to the page has got a whole lot of extra stuff changed on it by the tag manager code. So yes, that is a factor. It's not something we've experienced actually not from our stuff, because we know what we're putting into it, so we can peel it back. We've had a little bit on one of the marketing agencies, their code. It had it's the email backtracking. So if you click on an email, it essentially does something that counts it somehow. I can't remember how it works. But we were discovering a whole lot of weird Flash browser things where it's trying to load the Flash player, and we couldn't figure out why, because obviously we stopped using Flash about 4 years ago, that's the thing, and banned any development in it. But they were using Flash shared local objects. It's a type of cookie that Flash uses that isn't picked up by the browser. So that allows them to catch things even across different. So as long as that's stored on the computer from one browser, all the other browsers can pick it up, which is, it's quite a clever way of getting around sessions. But it effectively meant that every single person was getting this whole lot of Adobe stuff trying to interfere with their browser, and it was a real pain in the arse. But so all of these things, it is putting code into your page. So if you don't know what that code is, or you're mucking about with it, there are dangers involved with it as well. So yep.
I have a two-part question.
Ooh,
First is, you've
exciting.
said you've been doing it for about a year.
Yeah.
I'm interested in understanding a little more about the kind of impact that the results that you've been getting have had in actually making changes in the way you work. And then the second half of that is, how many of the changes are things that you implement within your decisions you can enact within your own team, or is it cross-departmental? And how easy is it to convince other people across the museum with the data that you're capturing?
It's a little bit of both. So the ones towards the end of this, which were the game one and the audio guide. The audio guide, we haven't yet gone live with that, although they've seen what it can do. Sorry, when I say they, that's the interpretation learning department. So they essentially commissioned the audio guide web app. We built it, but we also built all this data tracking in, mainly just to see whether we could do it. So this is probably the most advanced one we've got, and that we'll know for sure, partly to do with your question, which is what's going to happen when you've got hundreds of events tracking. One of the things we're not quite sure about on that note is whether it will tip us over towards the edge of Google Professional, which we're quite obviously keen not to go anywhere near because of its vast price tag. So if we get into that, we may have to reconsider. But coming back to your question, the whole point of this is to make impact. If you're just firing loads of data, you're just making clutter and buzz, and it's actually not helping you. It's hindering you because it's slowing things down and stuff like that. So the stuff that I showed earlier about the navigation, we've used quite a lot of that. That was actually not using Tag Manager. That was about 3 years ago. But one of the things you can do with this is you can hook it up to all the other stuff that goes on in Google. So, for example, we had a survey that we did with Culture 24 in one of their Let's Get Real sessions, where they were asking this one question survey of all the people that hit the site, which was, why are you here? And there are only 5 answers. And if you clicked any one of the 5 answers, it was then setting an event tracking thing which gave a value. Then you can use the custom segments to say, right, okay, just give me the data for all the people that said they were coming for a visit, or just give me the data for all the people that said they were going shopping, or whatever it was. Once you've got that sorted out, you can say, this is the navigational behavior of somebody going shopping. This, because we had the tracking on the navigation as well. So for we basically looked at all the traffic on the Visit Us, the people that said they were coming just to plan a visit. So we knew their prior motivation. Then we looked at their actual sort of behavior en masse from the event tracking, and then we worked out that pretty much, not all that surprisingly, something like 45% of the types of content they were looking at and navigating to was about what's on, and about 45% was about what's here to do. Yeah, so the utility stuff about how to get here. And then there was a little bit more about a few did a bit of collection stuff and a few did this, that, and the other. And then we essentially changed the visit pages completely. So we had 6 traditional data hierarchical 6 pages, go-to menu, visit us, what's under there? We've got visiting, we've got facilities, we've got eating. So there's a separate page for each of those with a sub-menu. And we stripped all of that out and put it all onto one page. Because of the people coming, we also knew that most of them, well, not most of them, but a much higher proportion of them than average were coming on a mobile device. Again, not that surprisingly, because behaviors changed from, I will find out what I'm doing, I'll pick up a map, I'll do it. So essentially people go out of the house, nobody plans anything, they just get the mobile out, they expect to be able to just find it out on the way and say, shit, where is that pub? And that's how people live their lives. So the thinking was, let's just strip away all the things that are difficult on the mobile, which is using a link. That's quite hard on the mobile. So instead of having 6 pages to navigate and a sub menu and things, we just had one long page, because people they scroll all day long, so they don't care about that, because that's not a barrier, whereas clicking a link is a barrier. So that was quite a big change. And effectively, by doing that, we reduced the download size of all that information by 86%. So that's quite I'm not sure whether anyone noticed that sort of thing, but it essentially had it should have had a fairly good effect. The other advantage is if you look at that page and download it in London and then get on the tube, you still got the page. If you navigate to another, you don't need to navigate to another page, so you've still got it as a sort of cached version, so you could use it in the tube as long as you've looked at it beforehand. So edge cases, but it has these sort of weird benefits. So those are the main things. We've done it where we've made major changes. We've used it as well to deflect the sort of thing where you have a meeting where lots of people aren't really in touch with their user, shall we say, but there's 10 of them and 1 of you, and 10 people in the room all agreeing with each other must be right. Yeah. So if you can say, well, the data says this, then it's quite empowering, basically. So and generally people are sort of up for that. But that's why you need the data to be really clear. If you just give them gobbledygook and say it's against their argument, they'll try and fight you for it. So it's okay. Any more questions? Oh, right.
It's sort of a follow-on, but so when you successfully went and took your plan section down to a single page, which is brilliant and somewhat obvious, right? Looking at
Yeah,
it
actually,
like
we were surprised we hadn't thought of it earlier, actually,
Yeah.
after we'd done it.
but now you've got to explain why your web traffic went down by 12% because
Yeah.
1 page instead of 6 pages of confused people clicking around, making it look like your website's great.
We pretty much, in that case, I think the benefits were fairly self-apparent. 86% less download time is quite difficult to argue from. And although some people won't necessarily know it, just things like the fact that we can say to them, Google essentially will rank you lower if you're not mobile optimized and things like that. So this was making it a better experience and things. So they get SEO, or even if they don't quite know it as that. So that wasn't too much of a battle. I mean, it is. I think you pointed out there are some things you can do yourselves and some things you have to ask permission for. And we didn't bother asking permission for this. We just did it and told them, and they went, and that sounds like a good idea. The audio guide's slightly different. That audio guide in its current state is an audio guide, but originally it was a gallery guide with all sorts of essentially written text interpretation that was there to augment the stuff that wasn't in the collection system. And we had Frankly Green and Web, actually, we did a survey with some people looking at it, and they looked at all this stuff, and essentially they all just said, I don't care about all that sort of stuff. It just, I just want to get on fast. And so we pretty much stripped everything out. There was a map, there was to help you get around it. There was a whole lot of sort of almost like article-y things which are extra information about these objects and things, and essentially we came back to these principles of whatever the guide does, it should not stop you looking at the object. So pretty much the only things that you want it to do are audio, unless you can think of a damn good reason not to, because if once you've got those on, you can still look at the object, but you're getting extra, and that was the fundamental sort of thing of it. Trying to think. Yeah, I think that was sort of about it really on that. So. Okay, you're looking fairly tired. Oh, yes.
For your audio guide, are you're providing Wi-Fi in all
Yes,
the VNA?
yes, there is.
Would
yeah.
it work offline?
No, it wouldn't really. Well, the thing would load, but the audios wouldn't. So, but we are going to try and route the audio traffic directly to the servers to make it sort of faster over the Wi-Fi. But
all the data collection would not work, or there's no way to.
well, none of it would really work. So it is a web app. It's not an app. It's a website really. So effectively, if the web wasn't connected, you wouldn't get a service really. But yes, it does rely on a fairly hefty Wi-Fi. So just hoping IT keep their word on that one. Okay. There's any more pressing questions? I think probably take pity on you and let you sort of stagger around off into the things. Okay, well, thank you for coming. Good.